Welcome to Tulsa Time. I am your host, Adam, and with my co-host, our lovely Dan. Dan, how's it going tonight?
It's going great, my man. First episode down.
Oh my gosh, what a great episode. It was so entertaining, very cool to jump into. Just overall, what'd you think of tonight's episode, Dan?
I thought it was a lot of fun. We came off of a preview podcast episode, and I had a lot of questions about just the tone and the vibe of the show. And after first episode, I felt like, yeah, I can get into this. It's interesting, right? It's got kind of the mafia feel that you're looking for, but it's not quite the dark gritty that I thought, but I don't think it needs to be that. I think it's going to have a cast of amazing woven together characters. I'm just excited to see how that all comes together.
Great. We're going to start reviewing the episode. Dan, feel free to stop me whenever you feel like. Episode starts off, Dwight is in prison, basically saying he's been in prison for 25 years, keeping secrets, and he doesn't keep thinking, and he keeps thinking that 25 seconds wouldn't have been worth what he spent 25 years keeping. So now he's expecting favors for his loyalty. It sounds like he was expecting to be taken to a really nice restaurant, but out of being taken from prison, he was not. Instead, he was taken by a driver to a strange house who he didn't even know the guy. It's interesting. At that point, the intro came on, and the intro was pretty cool. I really liked it. It was kind of like an Oklahoma, it was kind of like a morphing of what should be New York with different iconic images of New York, but replaced with iconic images of Tulsa. But
I wasn't even sure that there are iconic images of Tulsa, but yes, definitely.
Yes, it showed the Statue of Liberty and a cactus, and it was like, can you compare the two? No. It wasn't. Supposedly there's some iron guy in Tulsa, and I don't know what he's called, but they took the head of the Statue of Liberty, but then the iron guy body of this guy in Tulsa, and it was just really cool. What'd you think of that intro, Dan?
I thought it was nice. Yeah, I like the kind of the combining of imagery that you were talking about. What was interesting, I'm curious if you think about these shows from Sheridan as part of this universe together, because when I started seeing the pictures, I wasn't even thinking about Oklahoma necessarily. I was like, oh, this feels like images from Yellowstone that you could be pulling in there too. And so it made me, and I know that there's probably not the shared universe, but that's what made me initially think of that as, oh yeah, you can tell there's a little bit of bleeding over of some of the other shows that we enjoy too.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. I thought this was very Taylor Sheridan, like you had just said. And what was interesting, though, is that I did not pick up on a great theme. I didn't pick up on a great something out of the music that I could whistle back to or hum back to or whatnot. It was great imagery, not the best of music behind it, but hopefully I'll be able to sing it back for you. So, Dan, go ahead and sing me back the intro for
not on your life, my friend. I was the instrumentalist. You were the vocalist back in our college days. So I think that would be on you. But no, I agree. I don't think the theme was particularly catchy. I just caught kind of the whistling piece coming out of it that made it feel a little Westernish. And so it was contrasting the two musical styles a little bit, like the imagery at the same time, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, I didn't pick up on a theme that I'd be like, oh, just listening to it. And I'd be like, that's my show.
So many people are like, boo doo 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 doo, and that's Yellowstone.
Is that really? I have no idea what that was.
Oh no! But Dan's only seen a couple episodes. But as far as this one, I could sing it about 30 seconds after it happened because I remember watching it and being like, I don't know about that theme. But tonight, I can't think of anything. Anyways, so. Dwight is then brought into a house where he is brought into a room where he meets a couple of people, sees his nephew, and it's pretty uncomfortable. And he ends up having a couple of guys stand behind him as he's about ready to talk to the bosses. And very uncomfortable.
Hold on one second. So I'm totally with you there. I just want to say one more thing. When he's driving through the town and they skip past the restaurant.
Right.
I thought that was it was let's inject young people doing young people things. It's like two people there with their VR goggles, just like pointing at stuff randomly, and he's nodding at them like, you hooligans, kids these days. And it's like, that's a little bit on the nose, but I understand when you're trying to set the stage for a broader picture, you got to move through stuff very quickly, but it just made me laugh at some of the looking at those young people on the streets doing young people stuff.
It pisses me off, Tim, honestly, because have you ever driven and seen people wearing VR goggles? Ever?
And granted, I don't live in New York City, so maybe that happens all the time. But yeah, my first instinct was that's a weird fit. But yeah, I understand what they're doing.
I honestly think until they hit, I don't know, maybe the second or third episode, they're going to be hitting a lot of the low-hanging fruit and just making up a lot of stuff as far as low-hanging fruit to kind of set the scene. So,
well, and even to that next scene, as we start talking about that in the room, from the beginning of the show, getting out of like little monologue in prison, getting out of jail, driving through town, ending up there, and then by the time he gets on the airplane, it was just like a couple minutes. Like that's a very small chunk of the episode to tee the whole thing up. So I thought, given those constraints, if you have that little showtime devoted to that backstory, at least initially up front, I was like, yeah, that was fine for the few minutes it was.
He got into the room and his nephew is now the underboss. And the nephew basically tells Dwight that there's nothing left for him in New York. And Dwight is pretty upset about that. They tell him he's going to go to Tulsa and he's not thrilled about it. And then basically a guy says to him, you go where you're supposed to go, you go where you're told to go, and that's it. And Dwight says, hey, I was doing things back when you were in diapers, all right? And then the guy says to him, now you're in diapers. And Dwight, pop. I don't know if that hit the microphone, if that made sound, but let's try again. Yeah, popped him.
I'm not sure if that was a very strong punch at him. You have something on your soundboard? Put it in some sound effects.
My left hand, I don't know. Let's check my sound effects. None. So he's then brought into a house where he's brought into a room and he meets a couple of people. He sees his nephew, but it's very uncomfortable because there's guys behind him. And I'm sure that's because he thinks he's going to get whacked. But he reluctantly continues, and his nephew is now the underboss. There's mafia older guy in front of him who seems to be on oxygen at this point. And they basically tell Dwight that there's nothing left for him in New York. And Dwight is pretty upset by that. They tell him he's going to go to Tulsa, and he's not thrilled about it. And then basically a guy says, hey, you're supposed to go where you're supposed to go. And Dwight says, hey, I was doing things back when you were in diapers. And the guy says, no, you're in diapers. Can we just stop? That was such a great Sylvester Stallone, and it wasn't even Sylvester Stallone's voice. Okay, so the guy goes, now you're in diapers. And so then Sylvester, I know. So then Sylvester Stallone pops him in the mouth. Guy goes out cold, and I'm like, Adrian! Yeah, he knocks him out cold.
Adam's embellishing this a little bit, but yeah.
Just okay. And that was the thing. He was laying out, and then they basically tell Dwight, this is where you're going to go. And eventually he leaves that room where it was pretty crazy. But what were your thoughts on the room situation where he meets the mafia bosses?
Yeah, he clearly has relationships going back a long time. I thought it was interesting after 25 years of this guy being locked away and the mafia's emphasis on family and relationships and that kind of stuff. I thought, wow, that sends a lot of strong signals when it isn't any kind of thank you, celebration, whatever. Like even by offering up this whole city, certainly the optics are like, hey, do this next thing we want you to do or you're toast. So, I mean, it definitely set our way or the highway kind of message. I'm curious to see what the plot development is like with the other people in the room in the future episodes. Clearly, I think that Chicky will play a larger role, the underboss, which I took that as, was he the son of the Don? You referenced the guy in Oxygen back there. But anyways, I think they're related. And so, yeah, I think we'll see some more development there. But yeah, it definitely wouldn't be the thing. I was with Sylvester Stallone's character, Dwight. I was feeling like, wow, you went through that whole experience and this is how you treat you. That's got to feel like garbage. So I was actually surprised how quickly he turned it around from popping the guy and then essentially saying, okay, yeah, I'm going to Tulsa.
Yeah, boy, that was quite a blow to him. And as far as what the future entails, in a sense, he made it seem okay. All right, I'll go to Tulsa. It seems like maybe I can breathe a little bit better there. I don't have to worry about you guys screwing with me here. He took off, and essentially, Dwight goes to the airport. He flies back, or he flies to Tulsa. A grasshopper shows up and lands on him, and he's pretty grossed out by it. And
wait, can I say one more thing before we get there? So that conversation in the room, didn't he mention that he's got to kick up like $5,000 a week? Essentially pay it back to the bosses.
Okay, so here's what I didn't understand. Was it $5,000 a week he has to pay them, or they'll pay him $5,000 a week?
Oh, see, I would have thought it'd be passing it up, right? Because they're going to essentially probably extort businesses and stuff like that. So I thought it was like, here's how much you have to kick up. Because I thought it's like whatever he makes on top is gravy, and they're probably going to up their fee that he has to pay, but like to get him started. So I don't know. That's a good point. I guess it could go either way. My question was going to be, assuming that I was on the right path, but you're exactly right. It might be the opposite. But if you had to kick up $5,000 a week, I was going to say, what would be the first thing that you'd do? Because I'm sure he's got this in the back of his head. I got to start this up, which I think then sets up some of what's to come. But that's not a small amount of money if it was to do that. But I see what you're saying. Maybe they're giving him some money to throw around at first.
See, at the time, I thought that they were like, you don't like this, but I'm just letting you know, we're going to give you $5,000 a week to keep it going. But the more I think about throughout the episode, I'm like, yeah, he probably was paying them $5,000 a week. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to rewatch that part again, honestly.
I mean, I think you're coming a little bit too much from corporate world where it's like, here's your budget for your department. For them, it's like, we got to extort it out of everybody else, so there is no money.
So he goes on the airplane to Tulsa, and he's brought to Tulsa. He gets off at the airport. He's walking out. There's music playing, and all of a sudden, he goes, "Oh, grasshopper." And then a grasshopper hops on him, and he is incensed by the whole thing. He's grossed out by it and says that it's not good. And then a woman actually comes up to him and starts to make him aware of what's going on. And he says that grasshopper is as big as my bleep. And he goes, but actually I'm more bleep than that grasshopper. It's always good when you're comparing the size of your manlyhood to a grasshopper, by the way.
I've never compared it to any insect. That's a unique way to go.
See, usually I always pick a flea. I'm always like, hey.
Set low expectations.
I'm not going to pick like an elephant. I'm going to pick like a flea. Yeah, that's what I'm going to pick.
Okay.
So he goes on.
I think we should probably strike this segment here.
And then the lady squirts him in the face.
That's a really No.
The lady, she squirts him in the face.
You went from
Wait, it's holy water. Don't worry. It's holy water. I thought it was a mess at first. And waiting for it to just boil out of this section. It was just holy water.
We're going to start this section from. This is all garbage. We can't use this.
So Dwight is there like, hey, don't worry. I thought she sprayed him with mace, but this guy who was leaning against the wall was like, hey, no, it's holy water. Don't worry. You're upsetting all the religious nuts around here. And then that guy is named Tyson. Tyson picks up Dwight. Tyson's a cab driver from our first episode, and they have some hilarious banter, especially when Tyson calls Dwight a gangsta. Dan, did you find as much enjoyment out of gangsta as I did when they were talking about it?
Yeah, it's a fun scene. I was actually focused. What I was thinking about the whole time is in their banter, and Dwight is asking about the Sooner State, and they're talking about looking it up, and they reference the iPhone and that kind of stuff. And then that got me looking up on Wikipedia and various sources about the Sooner State. Do you know why they call them Sooners?
No, but I suppose you're going to tell me.
I mean, I'm going to tell you. Yeah, this is not a history podcast here, but just a little lesson as we go through it. No, it's super interesting. So they have this block of unassigned lands in Oklahoma. This is before it was a state. And Oklahoma was like, I don't remember the number, but like in the 40s for number of states. I didn't realize it took that long for it to become a state. But they basically had all these tracts of land and they put on these races to come in and basically plant your flag and say, hey, this is my land. And you'd get up to 160 acres. So they'd start these races that they'd have and fire a pistol. And if you jumped the gun, there'd be people who'd come in a week or a couple nights ahead of time and try to sneak across the borders and be hanging out like in the bushes. And then as soon as they'd fire the gun, they'd just like magically pop out of nowhere and be like, ta-da, I'm here. And so anybody who was essentially cheating the system, those were the Sooners. And I was like, wow. And then also crazy to have teams and stuff named after a bunch of people cheating, but it's part of their history.
Then it seems like Dwight is going to ask Tyson, oh, you want to call me gangster? Okay, pull over. And then
I rushed in there for a second.
I really think that every time my Sylvester Stallone comes out, it gets better and better. Anyways, it seems like he might confront Tyson, but he actually asks about like a weed dispensary, and he's, what's that for? And then Tyson's, yeah, that's a weed dispensary, and yeah, that's, you know,
that's our terror.
I was thinking about the different accents I do for Tyson. I was thinking nerdy, but he really doesn't sound nerdy. By the way, I think Tyson's laugh is damn near the funniest thing I've ever heard, because Sylvester Stallone Dwight says something while he's in the car, and Tyson's like... Love that. Anyways, so here we are. They stopped the weed dispensary. And yes, Dan, we were right. It is only a medical marijuana dispensary. We finally find that out for sure because he's asked about his medical ID when he walks in the door. He asks about how their medical marijuana place works. And then Dwight asks him if he could talk to the guy in charge, who is named Bodie, which may be the first time in my life I've ever heard of a man named Bodie. Dan, how many people do you know named Bodie?
One, besides this character.
Wait, else named Bodie other than this character?
Yeah. I was in a church camp and there was a youth director, and his name was Bodie.
Bullcrap. There's no way a guy named Bodie.
I really do know this guy named Bodie.
Is he from Oklahoma, or that's just his nickname, or that's his real name?
I think that's his real name. He's got long, curly blonde hair. I can introduce you sometime, but I'm not making it up.
Please do. Okay, he first asks for Bodie. The guy says to him at the front desk, no, you can't see Bodie. And then the security guard comes up and tells him he's got to leave. Dwight walks back out the door, walks out to the guard, grabs Tyson's water bottle, walks in and hits the guy in the face, the security guard in the face. Security guard is knocked out. And then Dwight asks if he can see Bodie, and then Bodie walks out. And so then he goes in with Bodie to the back room, and Bodie shows him the books.
Which, like, okay, what was your initial reaction to this? Because I remember us thinking about our predictions about the episodes and things like that. And it's not to say he won't have some kind of introspective look at himself or anything like that. But at the beginning of this episode, when he's essentially, oh, this wasn't worth it, doing this crime and ending up in prison, I thought he'd take a little bit of time to wrestle with the dynamics of being in the mafia and that kind of stuff. It was like from landing, hop in the car, stop at the first business use and chuck a metal bottle at a guy to knock him out. I was like, wow, okay, he's snapping back into it pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure it was the first business. I think that he did see a marijuana leaf, and that's what made him stop. Because I don't think that this show would be revolving around a Perkins, but I would love if it was. I would love. What's that Perkins for? And then the guy's, oh, we have really good sugar cookies. Like a really great breakfast. Like, preferably Taylor Sheridan. I would love if you would do that around a Perkins. Anyways, no, I think that it was intentionally a marijuana dispensary and was pretty content, with the fact that's what he knew. And he knew that, okay, yeah, I may have changed, but this is what I know. And this is the first thing a guy who is supposed to be, quote unquote, the general would do in this situation.
Yeah, makes sense. It really set the stage. Here's how you take over a business and get a percentage there. I've never known how to do that before.
Bodie shows him how much he has, and Dwight takes 20% and says he will take 20% forever and keep him safe from gangs and the law, which Bodie reminds him there are no gangs there and this is legal. But whatever, he gave money to Tyson. He told Tyson to go buy him a Lincoln Navigator and be his driver. Did you have any thoughts about him overtaking that marijuana store and then asking Dwight to be his driver?
No, I think the big takeaway for me was if you're so sure in the legality of the business as a business owner, I would wonder, here's this guy who's just starting up. He doesn't have a whole team with him and there are no gangs. So I'd be inclined to call the cops at that point. Like I picture the future Dwight when he's got this whole network and now there are gangs and stuff. But if you're the first guy and you already have a security guy who didn't really do his job, I think I'd be inclined to call the cops before like agreeing to this long term. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how that turns out. But it felt like later that there's still hints that maybe not everything's on the up and up. Yeah, the medicinal portion is legal, but I don't know. Did you get a feel that maybe he's, I don't know, cooking the books or maybe selling something additional? I think that was perhaps the second time he came back, but I was like, interesting.
No, I didn't feel like there was anything else. I thought that in anything, it was Dwight's like charisma and seemingly, I know what the hell is going on, overpowered Bodie's, I thought I knew what was going on.
Well, why was he talking about, if you took that cash and put it in a bank, the feds would seize it? Why would the feds seize it if everything was on the up and up?
Just because Dwight says it, I don't know if that means it's true. I think he's trying to intimidate him.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe it is nothing. I just thought maybe there's a deeper story there somewhere.
I could be wrong. I've been wrong 3 other times in my life, and we'll never find out the other 2. Anyways, Dwight says that he would like to be taken to a place where he's going to get shit, some hotel where he can stay at. And he gets to the hotel. Tyson drops him off there. He's there for a little while. And then he's like, I need to go out. And so he goes out to a bar and he encounters a bachelorette party. They invite him to be on their karaoke party. And I was like, okay, this is the part I've been waiting for my entire life, is to see Sylvester Stallone karaoke. Please, God, make it happen. But unfortunately, Taylor, you ruined my life. You said, oh no, I can show you what, a real party is supposed to be like. And they went to a strip club. Wow, wow. I was not real thrilled about them going to a strip club. I'd rather see them at a karaoke bar. But they went to the strip club. Basically, Dwight is there. The women go on to the, strip club stage. I don't know if that's what they call it. And he says to the strip club owner, just make sure nobody touches them. And the strip club owner says, you're the boss. And I was like, okay, so right now, Dwight has overtaken a marijuana dispensary and a strip club joint. That's awesome if you're Dwight, because you're really making like a move right away.
Did you think he was actually taking over the strip club? I thought he was just giving some cash.
He was not taking it over per se, but if the guy says you're the boss, that's a pretty good step in taking over the strip club place.
Oh, I thought it was just like, I'm giving you a wad of cash to do whatever I want. And yep, you're the boss. But yeah, that's an interesting point. I'm curious what you thought about, he went to the same bar twice before they went to the strip club. And he had some pretty good conversations with some of the patrons there and then talked to that bartender. What do you think the relationship is going to be with the bartender?
Taylor Sheridan, I'm sorry if you might have felt like you didn't give this away, but let's be honest, you gave it away that he's going to be in cahoots with the head of this bar, the bartender of this, because we were shown him in multiple previews of it that they're going to be friends or he's going to be part of Dwight's mob. Did you pick that up too?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. To have two scenes there and then those conversations a couple times and start telling your backstory and that kind of stuff, it definitely sets it up for something.
Absolutely. So after the second time where they met those Lorette parties, he says, I could take you to a real place. And then they brought him to a strip club. That's where the guy comes up to him and says, hey, you can't let him on stage. And then Mr. Stallone's, hey, just make sure the creeps don't touch him. And so he's okay. So then a creep touches him. Great job, guy who's supposed to protect him.
I know, that was my first thought too. I was like, he literally had one job.
And the very next thing that could be said was the guy didn't protect them. Okay. All right. Anyways, so then good old 76-year-old Dwight walks over there, punches the guy out, makes sure his hat's on him, and then walks back, sits down. The woman comes over to him and she's, hey, what you doing? Where you staying? And then he's like, I'm over at the hotel. And are you liking these impersonations on these?
Pretty terrible, but I appreciate you.
Yep. So she goes, where you staying? She's Italian to it. And he goes, over at the hotel. So they go back to the hotel. She goes, can I wear your robe? And he goes, oh, yeah, what do you want? I'm assuming they slept together, or it was just an awesome talk time where they just talked forever. Anyways, they got the chit-chat, and she begins to ask him, like, how old are you? And again, this was one of the first things that we ever asked about this guy in the original episode, like our preview episode. It's like, how old is he? And when he explains how old he is, and he said he was in high school when JFK was assassinated, and like her reaction was the same reaction we had when we found out how old he was.
I don't know. I guess she's like 45. So she talks about, what did she say, an age canyon or something between the two of them? So it's probably like a 30-year difference between the two of them.
Yeah, it's an age gap, and she's, no, it's an age canyon. I wish you people could see Dan like signs to me, stop doing impressions.
So annoying. If you did one Sylvester Stallone impression attempt a show, that would be fine. But when you're like making up voices for Tyson and the woman, who I don't know her name yet, it just sounds terrible. She was like half Irish, half Italian.
I can't control where they're from, Dan.
Stop the voices.
Dan and I have said that multiple times in our lives. Stop the voices.
In my head.
She leaves. She's like very awkward the way she leaves. But she leaves, and then it shows the FBI, and the FBI is like talking about like ATF. ATF stands for what?
Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms.
Good job. Okay, good job. Okay, they're like sitting around talking, and then they say, we got a new guy over here. He's just come up on our radar from the mafia. And then it shows a picture of him, and you see the girl that he had slept with is an agent, and she sees a picture of him, and she's, oh my God, like, this is not good. She slept with one of the worst guys she could possibly sleep with.
So imagine that. First, she finds out that, and she's in the middle of a divorce, so she's not even fully divorced. And then she finds out that she slept with a guy 30 years older, whatever that is, and then finds out that he's number one. That's gotta suck. That's gotta be a rough day.
Yeah, that would be absolutely ridiculous as far as but again, if I'm her, I'm like, hey, this is great. I got an in. But anyways, the next scene, Tyson shows up. He's pretty dejected, and he's, hey, what is going on? Where's my Lincoln Navigator? And Tyson is not thrilled, looks pretty dejected at this point. And he goes, they would not sell me a Lincoln Navigator. They'd said I was a drug dealer and they refused to sell me it. And at that point, Dwight took a deep breath and he asked to be taken to the car dealership, which was pretty insane. At the point where he was at the car dealership, he asked to talk to the particular guy, and the guy was like, the guy said to Dwight, hey, this is a misunderstanding. And then Dwight basically kicks the shit out of him, wraps him up with the phone cord, said it didn't have to be like this. And the sum of that whole interaction, you pretty much judged Tyson by the color of his skin and by the fact that he had money instead of the job that I had asked him to do. And so now I have to do this to you. And basically he got a discount off of the Lincoln Navigator.
Well, I thought the more poignant part was like, you were afraid of the wrong guy. Like, you thought you were afraid of this black guy over here that you thought was a drug dealer or whatever. And then here I come in with a suit as a white guy in a suit, and you're afraid of the wrong guy. And I thought that was a pretty cool moment to phrase it like that.
No, you're absolutely right. You were... I was just about to go into it.
I know you were. You restrained yourself.
Afraid of the wrong guy, and then he just screws him up. You know what the funny thing is for me, Dan, is so my grandpa, I think he was full-blooded Italian, and he looks very similar to his old man muscles look very similar to the old man muscles of Sly Stallone. And so it's very interesting, like trying to imagine my grandpa doing what they have Sly do. It's okay. All right. He would never punch a guy in the mouth and then choke him with the phone cord.
As far as
I don't know. He might.
Oh, so I had to suspend my disbelief for a little bit for some of those scenes. Because again, he walks into a dealership, which presumably is successful. It's the main one in town, and beats the crap out of this guy with a phone. That's completely assault. Like, you think they're that afraid of him that they wouldn't call the cops? Or is there this, because I'm cooking the books or something else? I guess it's hard for me to understand. I get that it's part of mafia stuff, but I'm like, it's one dude. He assaults you in your office. That's usually something you go to the cops about.
But it seems like he's not willing to go to that level at this point. He's just, I should call the cops. And then Dwight is, let me help you. And so then he chokes him with the phone cord and whatnot. It is very interesting. So as somebody who is just in a normal town, could somebody just come in from outside the town and just bully their way into being a part-time owner of business?
Exactly. So here I'm coming off of just watching some of the first Yellowstone episodes. Imagine if his character walked into Montana, super independent, all the characters you've got on that show. You think they'd take that? They'd beat the crap out of him if that was the case. So it's that they're portraying, like, again, different show, but you've got strong, independent Midwest over here. But then you go into Oklahoma and you just beat someone up and you get whatever you want. It's kind of interesting. I've got a couple more things I want to talk about that I think we missed that are going to be important layers that will come in later. So one is 2 points in the episode. It showed a letter that had daddy on it on this envelope. It was both with him in prison. And then we see it again in the hotel room. And in fact, you can see the letter on screen, and it's his daughter, I think Tina, talking about, hey, here's my allowance and I wanted to buy you a gift. And it's this endearing thing. So presumably something he received in prison would be my guess. And so we know that he's separated from his wife, and he says his daughter hates him. But I think we probably saw in the trailer or the behind the scenes, that's going to come into play later, the relationship with the daughter. Don't know exactly what that'll look like yet. And then the other thing I thought was interesting is, of course, you got to set up some rival criminal enterprise. It can't last forever that you've got just Dwight in the middle of Tulsa taking over the whole city by himself. And so we see this character, Armand, I believe, who saw him in the mall. He gave this weird look. Who is this guy? And then we see him calling presumably his boss, I think Eddie, saying, "You wouldn't believe who I saw out here. How in the world did Dwight Manfredi get out here?" And so I think we'll probably see, my guess would be a rival gang mafia, someone that knows him, probably infringing on the same territory would be my guess.
So, do you think that they beat them to the punch as far as installing a mafia enterprise, or do you think he just happened to be in Tulsa?
I'm sure there's a reason he's there. They're probably trying to drum up business the same kind of way. So my guess is it's a simultaneous looking to get in on all of the action in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But I don't know. It'll be kind of interesting to see where that goes. And then I'm curious if that ties back to the main family back in New York, what that will look like as well.
So I want to ask you about a couple broad scoping things just to see what your opinions are. One, as far as the country feel of Oklahoma, not that you've been to Tulsa a whole lot in your life, but
right.
How did you feel they presented Tulsa? Do you feel like it was representative of what Tulsa could be or should be?
This is tough. I hope we have some listeners who are from the Tulsa area, because I'd be curious. It's hard for me to form an opinion of a city I've never been to. I've been to Oklahoma City, but I haven't been to Tulsa. But again, it's what I was alluding to. It felt like everybody was just, okay, there's not this huge criminal element, but it felt like everyone was just willing to get run over in terms of not standing up for themselves, which was a weird first take. But I guess you can excuse that if there wasn't a large criminal element. But the only other, I feel like, exposure, thinking about the Tulsa Massacre, is that something you're familiar with, Adam?
It is, yep.
And just thinking about like the rich history of business and of African Americans in that town. And it felt like a very like bunch of white people plus Tyson in the middle of Tulsa. So I'm curious if that's just because TV gets a little bit whitewashed or if that's something that'll come up at all. But it felt weird to be like, out of that entire outcome, there's no criminal element or anything going on here. So it was hard to get like a real vibe. Like I didn't feel of anything cultural. Like you could go to any town in the Midwest and have dispensary and have a bar scene and a strip club. It didn't feel like anything super unique to the location where it's set. What did you think?
I think that probably it was okay with Tulsa, but again, if I'm relating to Yellowstone, do I think that Yellowstone is a lot like Montana? In that way, I would say that probably this movie or this series is to that of Tulsa, where they're like, kinda? I don't know. It's a little bit loose. But as far as humor, did you find it funny? Were you enjoying it on a humorous level?
I definitely found it entertaining. I don't think I found myself like laughing out loud, but I don't think it's supposed to be that kind of show for many parts. So I enjoyed it. But I guess I'm not like the person always like laughing at comedies and stuff anyways. I find myself a little bit more on the dramedy side, probably drama with a hint of comedy, which is where it feels like this show's at.
Yeah. Now, before we wrap up, what do you think are the particular predictions you have for the show? What do you think is going to happen in the coming episode?
Ooh, in the coming episode, I feel like I did pretty decent from my initial predictions of where things were going. We had a lot of ground that had to get covered. So I think we're just going to see taking some of the themes and fleshing them out a little bit. So I would guess that there's an element of, I think it was Bodie who was talking about his supplier. And so I bet we're going to go up the chain of the business there. So probably maybe it's a big grower or whoever. What was the name? Was it Jimmy or something? Maybe follow that path. I'm sure there'll be maybe takeover of another business, start to get higher on the radar of the FBI. We'll probably start to find out a little bit more about Armand. So I think probably fleshing out those storylines a little bit will be the highlight of the next episode.
So here's an interesting prediction. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Hart. Do you think we will see any crossovers from Yellowstone?
I don't. I think it's going to be one of those things where we all hypothesize about a shared universe, like I was alluding to before. I don't think we'll see. But to be fair, I've seen like the first 5-6 episodes of Yellowstone. I haven't watched the other season, so I have no idea how vast their network is. But I guess would be no. What do you think?
So I did not think so until you mentioned Jimmy. And Jimmy is a character in Yellowstone, and supposedly he is the character that heads up the marijuana part.
Oh, I'm not even sure if I have that name correct. I'm just trying to think back. I thought it was Jimmy, but I could be wrong.
If it is, that would be the perfect scene because he was heavy into drugs before. It would make sense if that were somebody. If that were someone that showed up from the Yellowstone show, I think everybody would be like, wow, this is cool. This is like legit.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So one of the things before we wrap up here, Adam, that I thought was interesting, I'm curious as we watch the show on the first night it comes out, and obviously it's going to take a while to get a little bit of traction, but as more and more people hear about it, I was just curious to see the spikes of people finding out about the show. Have you ever used a tool called Google Trends?
Google Trends.
Yeah.
No.
It's a free service that Google has. It's, I think, trends.google.com. Anyways, you can see different world events that are spiking in popularity and things like that. So I started searching for this show, Tulsa King. And one of the things that I found interesting is that you can see the regions of the U.S., so essentially the states of the U.S., where something is starting to be disproportionately popular. And so Tulsa King was showing that it was more popular for Oklahoma, Kansas, and Arkansas, which I thought, wow, this is pretty crazy. And now that doesn't mean it's more people. It's not like a volume thing. Like, obviously, there's more people in California watching this show or in New York watching this show. But it had me testing this hypothesis of, do people tend to watch shows that feature them like on a local basis? And then I started thinking about some of the other shows we watched. So I tested out with Yellowstone. And of course, at the top was like Montana, Wyoming, Idaho. And then Fargo was just a popular show. I live in North Dakota, so I searched for that. And of course, the Dakotas top that list too. And then for a second, I thought maybe something kind of skews this data, right? Like maybe people are searching for the city or the region and not actually the show. But it's really interesting if you start to put in some of the actors' names, Kelly Riley and Luke Grimes from Yellowstone, they spike disproportionate in those same states. So here, I just found that fascinating that, when people say, oh, you live in Fargo, is just like the show. And you're like, no, it's nothing like the show, whatever. So I thought that wouldn't be the case. But here, people are more interested in shows where they live. I thought it was kind of cool.
Here's the funny thing about Yellowstone. Yellowstone was popular, like you said, in the surrounding areas of Montana. Even it took me, so Yellowstone season 5 premiered tonight. And it took me a good 10 minutes to get over the fact that they were talking about Montana. I was so thrilled that they were talking about Montana for the first 10 minutes because John Dutton had won the governorship of Montana.
The spoilers, Adam.
Yeah, they already put it in the preview. Anyways, so...
Yeah, but I didn't know this.
They were... Watch a preview, Dan. Watch a preview. I was pretty thrilled about it, but like Yellowstone, for the first 3 seasons, it's so interesting because the first 3 seasons of Yellowstone, it was popular like in a small area, Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, Utah, and then like slowly it expanded, and then they took a year off because of COVID, and it turned out that year helped them tremendously because their popularity built so much over that COVID time that when they released season 4, everybody in the United States had been experienced or open to what is Yellowstone. And now that it's the start of season 5, everybody does. So I think like Taylor Sheridan has got a great strategy in that we're going to make it a very localized place, and this may take a season or 2 or 3 to catch on, but if it's anything like Yellowstone, it's going to catch fire.
I'm really curious if we could track the tourism trends. And then also with COVID and people moving to more remote locations to work, I would have to bet that these shows drive some people to go move to those areas to live.
So it's very interesting, Dan, because there was a line in Yellowstone tonight where he said that Montana is California's play toy and New York's dream or something like that. And essentially it was basically like, this is a game for those two areas, but this is where we live. And this is like important that we keep it the way that it is. And when you look at property and how much it has risen, there was a story last year where they talked about how much property has increased in value because of a show, because of Yellowstone. So like what you could have bought land for or a house for is far greater now than it was a year ago. Yes, because of inflation, but also because they saw a show and they wanted to live here. And honestly, when it comes to the actors, there was a recent development where they said, hey, where did you live and where do you live? And almost all the actors in Yellowstone now say that they have a place in Montana. And they didn't used to. They used to be in Los Angeles. What I would guess then, Dan, is judging by that, you have a lot of actors that live in Los Angeles and looked up property in Oklahoma. And they said, hell no, I ain't living in Oklahoma, because they are not.
Is that your California impressions?
No one wants to live in Oklahoma, Dan. Come on. Even the people in Oklahoma don't want to live in Oklahoma.
I was going to say, those of you who are in Oklahoma expect your property values to go up if it follows suit with anything you've seen.
Zero chances. Anybody wants to move to Oklahoma after this show because there's nothing redeemable about Oklahoma. But hey,
what?
We appreciate it, Oklahoma. You gave.
Was that your impression?
Yeah, that was my impression. But we appreciate Oklahoma.
This is coming from the guy from Montana, so he's a little bit biased.
You talking to me, Adrian? Anyways, so Dan, as we wrap up, any final thoughts on the episode 2 of the good old Tulsa King?
No, we'll look forward to watching it here. Hey, did you catch how Dwight got his nickname?
He's the general?
Yeah, why?
I don't know, Dan. Fill in our listeners.
Well, he was in the bar and he was talking about his parents that were immigrants from Italy, and they were obsessed with the general. And so putting 2 and 2 together, we're talking about Dwight Eisenhower. So in World War II. And so as the general, that's where he gets his nickname and also his name, Dwight. So we were wondering about that because it didn't sound like the most Italian name that we could think of.
So we'll find out what happens on next episode of the Tulsa King. Dan and I will be here to review the episode with you and give you the impressions. And hopefully with more Lester Stallone impressions. We'll see you next time on Tulsa Time.